I think too often we jump to task right away. You know how cars have lane assist on some cars? You know, that first time I drove a car with lane assist, Justin, but it just kept grabbing. There's a problem with the car. Apparently, I'm just a bad driver. We need a sufficient plan that we have lane assist so that we know, are we on track or not? And I think when we jump straight to task, we don't have a sense of where we're going, so we don't know if we're off track. That to further the car metaphor, all of a sudden the car's on the shoulder, or in the ditch, or in the field, or in the lake in the field. And then you're like, how'd the project get so far behind? There's a guy by the name of Fred Brooks who was asked the question, how does a project get a year behind? His answer, one day at a time.
What has been the leading cause of project challenging? Like, you try to get the stuff done, it's done. What is not letting it happen?
Two things that stand out to me, Justice, that I've just seen: insufficient involvement of stakeholders. So like stakeholder management is, you see project charters, you see documents that have a place for stakeholders to be listed. And so we list them. But a lot of times it's just the heads of different departments. We're not sufficiently thinking about who else is impacted. And then the other thing I'd say is denial of risk.
Welcome to the Life and IT Project Management channel, where we connect the dots between the life we experience and the IT project management delivering it. So both aspiring and experienced initiative drivers achieve real-world success. Today, we are joined by an award-winning keynote speaker and president of the Institute for Leadership Excellence and Development Incorporated, he's helped many organizations globally improve project delivery and team leadership. He's the host of the People and Projects podcast and author of Navigating the Winds of Change and other impactful books with keynote addresses delivered across 6 continents. Andy equips leaders with practical tools to inspire success. Andy, we appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Great. So we will be discussing the topic with inadequate light shed on it. That is the art of project management. And the best way to dive into that will be from a practical standpoint. All right. Now into the questions. Now, the very first question I have, many might not know you, so it will help to start with your story. What first drew you into project management?
You know, actually, I started my career as a software developer. So I've always, even to this day, although I don't do software development now, I'm a geek at heart. I think like a software developer. And so I knew even in high school, that's what I wanted to do. And so, you know, no problems getting jobs because there was a big demand for software developers. But at one point, I was promoted into management because you know how this works? Sometimes someone's good at a call center, so let's make them a manager of call center. So like, hey, we had, there was an opening in management. He's a good developer. Let's make him a manager. And I made so many mistakes, Justice. I destroyed my teams. I made so many mistakes. But I eventually kind of got my feet under me and was a frontline manager and then a full-fledged manager. And we didn't call it project management then, but I was basically doing that. And eventually became a director and a vice president of systems. And throughout that entire career, really, my heartbeat was developing people. And so I started speaking at conferences and I ran into some people that said, hey, do you do this for a living? I'm like, you can do this for a living? Like, how does that work? Right. So, so in 2001, started a company that does project management and leadership training. And so the journey was throughout IT. And now we work with groups within IT and outside of IT, as big as the UN and the World Health Organization, to startups, technology, construction, pharma, I mean, all kinds of different industries. And our heartbeat really is, how do we develop leaders and how do we develop people to deliver projects? That's our heartbeat.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you for giving that background. And that easily helps with the next question. The next question is a bit more to be said, that it has sub questions to it. You work with several companies globally. Now, let's abandon the textbook definition of
right. Good deal. I'm with you.
Let's focus on the truth. So, based on your experience now, three sub questions. What is now your definition of who a project manager is, what the term project management is, and what industries really need project manager or project management?
Yeah. It's a really interesting question because I just had a conversation with somebody this morning who she's one of the facilitators on my facilitation team. And she has noticed an uptick of interest in project management training. So we're talking about that because I think when I was growing up in my career, a lot of times the term project manager was mostly relegated to construction and IT. And there would be other areas, but a lot of times people thought, oh, you're in construction or you're in IT. And it was kind of assumed that that was the case. I'm telling you, Justice, we have delivered project management training, and we get demands for training in all kinds of different industries now. I can't think of one that's irrelevant. I mean, we get administrative assistants in different companies. We get salespeople. I mean, the type of roles that you wouldn't normally think of classical project management. But what's going on is that a growing number of companies are realizing we got to get stuff done. We can't just talk about it. We got to get stuff done. And so you could argue in some ways to your first question is like, what does a project manager do? Get stuff done. That's what we do. We get things done. So anybody that has a due date and it takes multiple steps to get there, maybe they don't, I mean, and for sure they don't need a title project manager, right? They don't, it's so little about the title and so much about if you have to get things done, hit dates, you have constraints like budgets and, you know, it could be all kinds of compliance constraints, but yeah, right. If you have to get stuff done and hit dates, that's what you do. And you know, sometimes people think project manager is the boss. Like in my case, when I was a manager, I was the boss and project manager. But increasingly, it's people who they don't have the authority in the sense of team members don't report to them, but they need to somehow. And you know this, right? You have to get all these different groups, whether they report to you or not, to be able to get across the finish line. And so a metaphor that I really like for what you and I and those of us, you know, listening, I like the metaphor. No metaphor is perfect, but I like the metaphor of we're like conductors of an orchestra. We can't play all the music ourselves unless it's the smallest of projects. We have to find a way to get the different groups to be able to, you know, it sounds kind of cheesy, but to harmonize, to be able to stay on a certain cadence. And if this group does well, but this group doesn't, that's a problem, right? So how do we orchestrate across? It's not a perfect metaphor, but if we think of project manager as we're the conductors of an orchestra, we're trying to get things done. I'm sure there's an industry that doesn't need this, but I don't know what it is. I mean, it just applies to so many of us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Even if anyone were to speak to nuclear industry or you had to speak to even the medical industry, whatever delivers the products and all that, everything, the hardware, the software behind the scenes, this is definitely project management still. But of course, I had to ask the question for anyone who is thinking of clarify.
It's a really good question, Justice, to get clarity on, because like one of the things that I do is I teach an MBA class at Loyola's Business School in Chicago, and it's a healthcare MBA, because you mentioned healthcare. Most of the participants in the program are doctors. And so you think, well, doctors don't need to be project managers. Increasingly, the doctors are not just doing their clinical work. They have to administrate, you know, how do we build our business and how do we get more efficiencies? And so there's so much to be learned from lean and project management and all these different domains that even physicians.
Yes. Awesome. All right. So now having that clarity regarding what the project manager does and what project management is, there are a lot of numbers out there. And when I say numbers, I mean statistics regarding, okay, you say project management is needed. I even read something, I came across something regarding project management, typical traditional project management is not needed in software development, something like that. And I just basically ignored. I was like, okay, fine. People want to say stuff. But in your own experience, what has been the leading cause of project challenges? Like you try to get the stuff done. It sounds simple. What is not letting it happen?
Yeah, for sure. That's actually a really good question because, you know, the answer to, like I tell my MBA students, the answer to every question in this program is the answer is it depends, right? So it depends on the culture of the company. It could depend on a lot of different things. But two things that stand out to me, Justice, that I've just seen over and over, really regardless of industry, insufficient involvement of stakeholders. So like stakeholder management is, you know, you see project charters, you see documents that have a place for stakeholders to be listed. And so we list them. But a lot of times it's just the heads of different departments. We're not sufficiently thinking about who else is impacted, who could slow us down, Who could speed us up? Who are we going to be impacted? I think that one of the reasons why projects struggle is we just think of the obvious people and we don't think about the other people going to be impacted. And then once we do figure that out, they have new requirements or different requirements. We haven't managed expectations, and so that can cause a lot of problems. Involvement of people, that's a lesson I feel like I was not taught academically about the importance of the relationships even with them, how everything comes down to relationships. And then the other thing I'd say is denial of risk. I would say probably denial of risk, because I think too often we go into a project of, I'm not saying that, because there's a difference between being risk averse and denial of risk, right? Risk averse and risk aversion can be a problem that we're not taking enough risk, but denial of risk is more like risk, what risk? We're not sufficiently considering the risk. And I think in too many organizations, risk is a 4-letter word, so to speak. Like if you bring up a risk, you're being negative or you're not being a team player, or at least there's the fear of that so people don't bring up the risks. And for those of us leading projects, everyone listening to us knows this intuitively. There's always risk. Reality is undefeated. Right? Reality is undefeated. And so if we're not willing to have conversations about the risk, it's going to make projects really strong.
Now, to the benefit of those listening to us, I'm glad that they can hear that the very first reason that you gave had nothing directly to do with funding. You did not mention, yes, funding, but you say adequate identification of stakeholders. The second thing you mentioned, denial of risks. Those two came forward first. You now deep dive into other things. It appears that those two things seem tied to people's sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Now, when you tie those two to people, what prevents people from solving those two problems, typically in your experience?
It's a really good question. And of course it depends, but I think, like, let's take, for example, the denial of risk. There's this weird thing within us sometimes that feels like if we bring up a risk, that we're going to look like we're not in control, or we're not on top of our project, or that we're coming up with excuses. So one of the things that we talk about in our classes is that every time you have an update meeting with a boss or with key stakeholders, in addition to whatever else you talk about your top risks. And not only just what the risk is, but what are we doing about it to mitigate or to transfer, or what are our contingency plans? Have ongoing conversations about risk. But sometimes people are concerned about that because they're a little afraid that if I keep bringing up these risks, maybe I'll get people, maybe they'll be worried about it. So I think sometimes it's out of self-preservation or ego, or it just fear. I'd say maybe it's just fear of, I don't want to look bad. My experience of this one, Justice, is the project manager who talks about risks and has a plan, they don't look bad. They look awesome. Like they're looking further down the road. And, I'm not saying there won't be any fires, but there are less fires if they're looking further down the road. So I think fear drives us more than drives me more than what I even realize. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Right. Awesome. Now, so also to the benefit of those listening to us, to bring it closer to home, I will spin three scenarios, three practical scenarios, and anyone experienced project manager, they would immediately sense or feel or recall something that happened in their own experience regarding those scenarios. So
most scenarios, by the way, don't show up in these textbooks either, do they?
Exactly. So let's pick one scenario. Now, in most cases, the project manager can either be brought in at the beginning of a project or midway to salvage the project in many cases. Now, let us have a scenario where you are a project manager, regardless of when you're brought in, and you have a critical stakeholder or SME with a lot of tasks or quote-unquote work products or packages on that specific resource. Excellent, your project, where there is no positional power to even influence or make them understand that this has to be done by this time, this has to be delivered by this time. How do you manage such a situation?
You threaten that? No. This is, I think we can all relate to this sort of thing, and so I alluded to one of the strategies earlier, but a lesson I feel like I've had to learn the hard way is that the dirty little secret of business is everything comes down to relationships. Everything comes down to relationships. And so I think it's a different sort of conversation with people like this if we have a decent relationship, as opposed to if there's not a relationship there. So I don't remember, it was some guest on the podcast, Justice, I don't remember who it was, but they said, when there's trust, you're just checking in. But when there's not trust, you're checking up. Like, what? Why does he keep checking up on me? You know, like, no, she's just trying to check in, but there's not trust. And so, first of all, when I have issues with stakeholders that don't seem to be delivering, I try to just think, all right, first build relationship. Because if I start putting some sort of pressure or something like that on there, it's not relationship, they're going to probably get some pushback. So that's one thing. And then I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Robert Cialdini. He's known as the godfather of influence. And something that Dr. Cialdini recognized, he identified it as, he calls it commitment and consistency. And so the idea of commitment and consistency is people want to stay consistent to their commitments. And I think too often, Justice, I find we don't ask for commitments. So here's an example he gives in the book. And I found this to be completely practical. The example he gives in the book is a restaurant that's taking reservations. Now, I know you've got a global audience, and so in some countries, this is different of how this works. But let's say that it's in North America, the person at the restaurant taking the reservation might say, at the end of the call, say, all right, we have you, Justice, down for a party, 2 people, Saturday night at 6:30 p.m. If you can't make it, just give us a call. We'll see you Saturday night. That's a pretty normal way to end it. And most people showed up, but of the people who did not show, 30% of them did not call. And at least in a lot of North American restaurants, they'll hold the table for a while and not put somebody else there. And so that's money that they're losing. So they changed the script just a little bit. They changed it to, hey, Justice, we got you down, party, 2 people, Saturday night at 6:30. If you can't make it, will you call us? Pause. Now, what would you say?
Say, sure, I'll call.
Exactly, right. I mean, without even thinking, you go, sure. That simple question dropped the number of no-shows from 30% to 10% overnight. So here's how we can apply this in a practical way as project managers, is if somebody has a reputation for not delivering, it's usually not because they're a slacker. It's usually not just because they don't want to do the work. They probably have differing priorities and things like that. And so a lot of people, they work on what seems to be the biggest fires, right? It's Monday. What's the biggest fire? Hopefully by Friday, the fires are down. So one way to kind of light a fire, I found, is ask for a commitment. So instead of saying, hey, do your best, let me know if you have any trouble, what I'll say now is I'll say, hey, it's only, like you and I are talking on a Tuesday when we're recording this. Hey, I know it's only Tuesday. It's not due till Friday, but just double checking. Will this be done by end of day Friday? Pause. And usually you get either yes, no, or maybe. And Cialdini says if it's a yes, they're more likely to do it, especially the more public the yes. If it's no, you can be like, Andy, it didn't work. No, what you can do is you can ask questions like, what's getting in the way? Is there anything my team can do? Is there any information you can? And I've learned with the maybe that in life, if you treat maybes like no, it usually serves you pretty well. Exactly. So if they go, well, I might get it done on Friday, say, okay, is there anything that me and my team can do? What's getting in the way? And not waiting until end of day Friday to realize, it's not going to work. And so the orchestra conductor is keeping the beat, but also cueing the instruments. It's getting ahead of it. Like, okay, trumpet section, not yet, but now. Project managers have to cue, and asking commitments, I find, can be really helpful. Are we on track for Friday? Yes. Or will you have this done by end of day Friday? Pause. Instead of asking for, are you green, amber, or red? Which is fine, but those are easy to spoof, but ask for a commitment. I find that if you do it with respect and have relationship, I'm not saying it solves everything, but if worst case is, I know it on Tuesday and I don't have to wait until Friday to find out. So we can start trying to do something about it, try to mitigate.
Fantastic. For me, my own experience as well, let me just chime this. In my own experience as well, another cue for maybe is someone telling me, I don't like commitment for Fridays, because for me, that's a maybe. Thursday, in some way, shape, or form, I will try to communicate that, respectfully, this is needed by end of day Thursday. Yes, no, or maybe. If it's a maybe, then it's not chasing anyone around on Fridays.
Yeah. That's good. I like it. I like it.
That's the whole weekend.
Absolutely. I think we all know people that, like some people tell me, I have to tell my husband the reservation's at 6, so he'll be there by 6:30. Right. And so some people we might say it's due on Wednesday, right? Knowing that they won't get it done until Friday. And so I don't think the textbooks say to do that, but sometimes, right, there are games like that sometimes you feel like you have to play. But this idea of asking for a commitment, Justice, I think it is actionable. It's just one of those things. I've taught it all over the world. I've never had anybody in any culture get back to me and say it was not potentially helpful. You have to do it respectfully. But what I like about it is it works down organizationally, if we allow the term. It works with peers, but it also works up. Will we have that signed off by end of day Monday? Pause. If they go, yeah, so you're getting a commitment. And once again, the more public the commitment, the more likely, at least Cialdini's research says, the more public the commitment, the more likely they'll do it.
That's another key. Yes. So another good one. All right. Scenario 2. All right. So we have a situation where a project manager, and most experienced project managers have gone through this. I have had that. You have a team and you have SMEs on the team, subject matter experts in a specific technical area, whatever it is, right? Or even on the business side at a minimum. Now, they join the meeting. So for example, you're so unlucky that your project is the first Scrum implementation and no one on the team has been through a Scrum implementation before. Then you have a subject matter expert on that team. Obstinate at meetings, always critical, unpleasant to work with. What are practical ways of getting that stakeholder on your side?
Yeah. You know, I've actually worked with some people specifically on this, some coaching clients before. One was, well, let me give you a real world scenario. This is a guy who went from a good project management job to a really good program management job. And it was a very reputable company, really good to have on your resume or CV. And before the first week was done, he had to give a presentation to the governance committee. And so he hadn't even been there a week, and he's presenting, and there's one person on this governance committee who is ripping into him. He's like, how can you not know this? This is stupid. You know, like very disrespectful, very disrespectful. And this person, he's actually a friend. He felt like saying, I don't even know where the restrooms are yet. Like, give me a week. You know, like, I don't, you know, he felt like it was really unfair, but yeah, he didn't want to leave the company. And so it was a weekly governance update. And so the next week, he did more homework, tried to, know what's going on. The same thing happened. This guy just rips into him. And Justice, you've been doing this long enough, you'll eventually run into a boss or a key stakeholder that'll make us start to question our capability, right? They'll make us think, oh man, maybe I don't have what it takes. That's where my friend was at. He's kind of like, oh wow, maybe I've made a big mistake. Maybe I'm not as good. He's really started questioning. A lot of program managers and project managers suffer with the imposter syndrome. Like, man, if people knew how incapable I felt, that's how he was feeling it. So the way I coach people to go through situations like this is there's no simple answer, but first of all, you have to cognitively take it as a challenge. Like, I want to win this person. So I'm not giving any room for truly toxic behavior like what my friend went through, but like, I want to win this person. And so a lot of times it means do the homework. Like, I interviewed this guy, he wrote a book on office politics. He says, become the boss whisperer, which is to say, learn to be able to understand, how do you communicate with this person? Because a clear lesson is about communication is the way you communicate with that person is different from that person. Like, it could be cultural background, it could be personality, it could be their technical understanding. But I'm not going to drop a bunch of technical jargon on somebody that is in the finance department, right? And so it's learning to adjust. And so this guy, in my example, he started asking around, and what he found out is this guy treats everybody like that. It wasn't a personal thing. He calls it a murder board. The idea is if you rip into people while they're presenting, that if anything's left standing after that whole scorched earth approach, then maybe that's worth holding out to. It's almost like he was testing the person. That sounds like a terrible idea. That sounds like a terrible idea in the next 60s, much less now. But once he learned it wasn't personal, and once again, I'm not giving room for truly toxic and bullying behavior, which this was. I'm just saying that if we can realize everyone's justice, I'm curious if you think this is true. I think everyone's behavior to them is rational. So to this guy, it was rational. To the difficult stakeholders that we deal with, to them, their behavior is rational. And so we don't have to agree with them, but we got to figure out what is causing it. And I think it starts with like this cognitive, I want to understand, as opposed to, I'm going to write them off. They're idiots, right? I think that's too easy. Like, oh, they're just jerks. I think it's too easy to write them off. But if we stay in it and just like, wait, what's going on? And I learned from interviewing a guy named Tim David. He wrote a book on influence. He said, basically, people start acting bad when their needs are not being met.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's some need that's not being met. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not going to be able to truly understand all their needs. But one of the needs he talked about is a lot of times people act bad, if you allow that terminology, because they feel like they're not being listened to. And I think that's a good lesson for all of us leading projects, because it's very easy for us not to spend the time to really listen, to really pay attention. What are they really saying? And to understand it. We don't have to agree with it, but if they feel like we're not truly listening, or like we're treating them like a stakeholder as opposed to a person or a resource, we do that all the time in project management, right? Oh yeah, we need 2 resources. They're even a term like SME. I have no problem with that, but I'm just saying they're labels, and people often have these unique needs. And if we can try to draw them out. So another situation, I won't go into detail, but it was a head of R&D known to be very difficult. One of my coaching clients ended up, I wouldn't say close friends with them, but they ended up having a really good relationship. Very few people could get along with this guy, but he spent time building relationship, building trust. And a chief information officer told me this. He goes, credibility is currency. And currency isn't just compensation. See, in addition to that is, I will listen to you, but you have to deliver. And that's what project managers are good at, right? That's what we're trying to get good at, right? And so if we build up this reputation, I'm going to listen to you, I'm going to deliver on your needs, I'm going to pay attention, I'm going to make sure that, and if we can't deliver what you're asking, I can be honest with them and give them trade-offs. I don't know. There's no simple answer, but I think that the first step is don't write them off. I think we're too easily, especially in today's culture, right? There's us versus them. There's the good people and the bad people. One guest told me this. He said, avoid the BSL narrative, bad, stupid, lazy. And I think sometimes these difficult stakeholders are like, oh, they're just evil, or they're just trying to sabotage. So they're idiots. No, they're lazy. They aren't doing their work. Avoid the BSL narrative.
Oh, thank you so much for that. There's a friend of mine, Dawn Mahan. She did write a book. I'm not sure if you know her, Project Land. And she did discuss stakeholders. One of the quotes from that book was, every villain is a hero in their story, right? So yeah. You really need to understand. And there are people who are saboteurs, but they are saboteurs. That's the extreme. But they are saboteurs for a good reason. There are people who are snakes, but they are snakes for a good reason.
At least in their eyes, right? At least in their eyes, they're trying to save the day. They're trying to, yeah. So if we could try to understand it, like implied in what you're saying, we don't have to agree with it, but if we can understand it.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. Leading on to the next scenario, last scenario for today, so I don't disturb you or take all your time. Project manager finds that, a couple of stakeholders are beginning to complain about, okay, they're not receiving updates, or they're not being communicated with, and they don't feel informed, or they're just seen as stakeholders as opposed to people, right?
Yeah, right.
Now, when that begins to come up, what error has the PM made?
It's an interesting question, because I think we are very apt to use things like dashboards or status reports, and they're kind of like a one-way out. And that's fine. It's important to keep people informed. But every stakeholder deserves respect, but not every stakeholder needs the same sort of attention. Like some, if they're not actively involved, they're not all that interested, they don't need the same level of interaction that somebody who's a lot of power and a lot of involvement and things like that. So one of the things we talk about in our classes is the difference between keeping involved and keeping satisfied. And it might sound like semantics, but if I've learned anything in 36 years of marriage, keeping my wife informed is not the same as keeping her satisfied. And so there's some people that the dashboard updates are just fine. But what if I update a dashboard that says we went from green to amber, and somebody's upset about that? I said, well, I updated the dashboard. If that dashboard is updated on Monday, why wasn't I getting together with them on Thursday or Friday to give them a heads up that that's going on, and to let them know? I've yet to meet somebody who likes to get blindsided. Nobody likes to get blindsided. So let's get even more practical. PMI talks about having, Project Management Institute talks about having a communication plan or communication management plan, some form of that, of setting expectations of how often will you hear from me? What will the forums be? Like, how will it show up? And realizing which people do I need to spend more time with? Which people, just the email would just be fine. But adjusting the message to this, they don't read their email. They just don't read their email. So maybe I text them and send the email. Or maybe what I do is I try to get on their calendar for every Thursday just to be able to, just give a quick 15-minute update, something like that. But it's adjusting the style. I think we underestimate how much of our job is really communication. And just because we update a dashboard or send out a report, that's often not sufficient. There's a classic question that shows up on the PMP exam that is, what % of your time should you be communicating if you're a project manager? And the answer is up to 90%. And so I think it's, who has time? Well, how about this? It's our job. Yeah, we have to do it. It's fundamental.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. I'm sure you've seen it all. And trust me, when I say you've seen it all, what I mean is you've not been on all kinds of projects, but you've been on a broad stroke of projects to be able to say, yes, these themes are similar. These definitely will reoccur in the future. Now, thank you for walking through those scenarios. My next question will begin with you. I'm a husband myself. I'm a husband and a parent myself. So I've noticed that you often ask your podcast guests about how the ideas getting their books apply to real life, basically, whether being parents at home or in marriage and so forth. How have you seen project management principles work in personal life?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. My wife and I, we have 5 kids, and 3 of them are now out of the house and married, and 2 of them are teenagers at home. And our company put together a project management for students class. And so it's an e-learning, self-directed, and our kids went through it. And so now they know what I teach. So they're often saying, well, Dad, we need to put some stakes in the ground, or we need to, they don't call me their sponsor, but it's interesting how, like, it's basketball season right now when you and I are recording this, and I coach my son's middle school basketball team, and sometimes it feels like on weekends we need a Gantt chart, right? So we don't use a Gantt chart, but we will sometimes use Kanban boards around the house. So it's like, what all needs to get done before we celebrate this holiday? Where are we at with it? Is it done? And so we'll use that. But even things like influence. He'll turn 14 just a couple weeks. He said, Dad, you always tell me you don't get if you don't ask. And so I need to make an ask. So he's using these things that are fundamental to what all of us have to do. We know we need to make an ask. So it may not sound like project management, but it's project management. We have to ask for a commitment, things like that. So I just see, in fact, almost every guest I've interviewed, and we're like at episode 43 or something like that now, almost every guest where I've asked the question, they find that their leadership or their project management content applies at home. We have to, my wife, it's been a while, Justice, since she said it, but this is years ago. She goes, honey, I'm not your stakeholder. But she's right. I need to treat her as a person. So there's a lot of lessons we can apply.
Awesome. Stakeholder management.
Right, exactly.
A lot of early risk identification.
Absolutely.
Action plans and all that. Those are definitely very applicable. All right. Fantastic. My toddler was begging for attention out there, so you probably heard it.
No, I didn't.
No worries. Anyway, the same thing applies to him as well. So.
For sure. That's true. Yeah.
All right. So now for someone new to project management, whether as an entrepreneur or for a career, what advice would you give to help them enhance their chances of success on projects as they get into work initiatives and project managing life, basically?
Yeah. I think too often we jump to task right away. Like, all right, I got to do this, start doing this. We jump to doing stuff instead of sometimes just a simple plan, even just a simple plan. You know how cars have lane assist on some cars, that first time I drove a car with lane assist, I didn't know it had lane assist. And so it just kept grabbing I'm like,
and you had to.
There's a problem with the car. Apparently I'm just a bad driver. I think that's but we need a sufficient plan that we have lane assist so that we know, are we on track or not? And I think when we jump straight to task, we don't have enough of a sense of where are we going, so we don't know if we're off track. And if to further the car metaphor, all of a sudden the car's on the shoulder or in the ditch or in the field or in the lake in the field. And then you're like, how'd the project get so far behind? There's a guy by the name of Fred Brooks who's asked the question, how does a project get a year behind? His answer, one day at a time. Is that true? It's like one day at a time. So if we can just say, hey, if you're new to project management, get, like we call them in our class, we call them stakes in the ground. Like no further out than every other week. And maybe even every week, but where do you want to be by Friday? What about that next Friday, or to your point, Thursday, right? But where do we want to be? And so if we are off track, it's just a little change, not getting so far off track that it's difficult to come back. You know, getting some stakes in the ground, 2 weeks or less, every one of those checkpoints can be helpful. You know, understanding that there's trade-offs. Like I like the phrase, we can do anything, we just can't do everything. And so when somebody asks for this change and that change, you don't have to say no, be like, we can do anything, we just can't do everything. And so not if change happens, but when change happens, what are the trade-offs that could make it acceptable? What are some, can we find a way to make it acceptable? Expect things to go wrong, identify risks, like what could go wrong, and try to think about those, be just more proactive. There's just all these little things from formal project management that you can do almost informally and like break the work down. Like you don't have to call it a work breakdown structure, but just break the work down into some smaller things. You almost always find there's more work than what we thought there was. And so even if you took like a simple, like essentials of project management class, that sort of thing, I think people would walk out going, I needed this.
Foundational, yes. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. And for the audience, please note that Andy did not start deep diving into, you need a certification, you need that. No, you need to know basically the most important thing. It's one big problem to solve, which is how do I project manage life, apply it personally or apply it in delivering an initiative, and how is it done? You need to learn that it's not, you might have some thoughts in your head, but you really need to understand, sit down for a course and get the full frame of what it takes to be successful, basically. The last question I have is, now moving on from aspiring project managers to experienced project managers. And when I say experienced project managers, I'm coming from the standpoint of, whether they are CTOs or CIOs or program managers themselves, or even portfolio leads. What advice would you give them to improve the success rate on initiatives they oversee?
Yeah. Years ago, I interviewed this guy, 𝗀𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃. He wrote a book called Do Nothing, as the title of the book, Do Nothing. And somebody might say, I know some people that, or they might say, I want to know, how does that work? But the premise of the book is that the higher you get up, the more it should be perceived you're doing nothing. And it's not true, nothing, but doing nothing in the day-to-day. The higher you get up in an organization, or the more responsibility you get, the more you need to be looking further down the road. And I find, especially with IT, although it's outside of IT as well, that a lot of times the reason why we got more responsibility is we were good individual contributors here, but we have trouble letting stuff go as we get higher or more responsibility. And so that can definitely hold us back. So something in 𝗀𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃's book, he said, it's probably the biggest thing I took away from it, Justice. He said, trust people more than they expected. If they've only earned a 2, you don't extend a 10. But if they've earned a 2, maybe a 3 or 4. And I think as people get more and more responsibility, instead of, I'm going to don the cape and be the superhero and do it all myself, how do I continually develop the people around me, develop their project management skills, let them facilitate the meeting? I actually, somebody who's a client, but he's also a good friend, he recently had to spend some time in the hospital, longer than what he thought. His teams did really well because he had developed this capability that not everything had to go through him. And I think one of the ways we constrain ourselves is, and maybe it's because we want to feel important, maybe it's, we fancy that we can do it faster and better than other people, and maybe that's true, but we develop the people around us so they can do those things. It allows us to have opportunities to do more ourselves. And I think that's one of the biggest common patterns or themes I see of people getting more and more responsibility is, what do I let go of and what do I still have to do myself? And it depends on a number of factors, but I think it's something worth reflecting on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It can be, especially for a new portfolio lead, if your first time being responsible for delivery governance as well as fiscal responsibilities and all that good stuff. Might get to even see some project managers do things wrong and you get tired of mentor this person, do I coach this person?
Right. Sometimes it just seems easier to do it yourself, right?
I just get it over with myself. I don't have the time for this.
Right. I heard it as like multiplying your time, though, that if you spend a little time, even though it's a pain, every time that they don't have to come to you, that time is being saved again and again and again. So you're multiplying it, even though it is a pain to do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. So at this point, I can ask the objective question of somewhat objective question that directs you given and given and given and given. So at this point, I think we want to give back to you in a way. So I can ask, do you have a service or workshop that is coming up shortly that the audience should be aware of and should basically look forward to being a part of?
Yeah, multiple times during a year, we run a program called Essentials of Project Management. So sometimes people who are looking for certifications take that as a stepping stone, but some people just go, I just want to learn practical skills on project management. So the Essentials of Project Management, it's we do it in a very interactive form, but you don't have to travel to get to it. It'd be something like this. You've talked to my friend Jeremiah before. Jeremiah is one of our facilitators. We do that. We do that all throughout the year. And so that would be a very easy for someone who wants to go, I don't want to be a formal project manager, but I want to learn. That'd be one. And something that is actually free, we call it Lead 52. And what you do is you get an email every Monday morning. You can read it in 5 minutes or less. So the 52 is 52 weeks. And it's a leadership lesson that you can read in 5 minutes. And then our whole global community is working on that during that week. And then at the end of the week, I share some of that feedback that I got from other people. And so it's super quick. You can unsubscribe at any time, but it's one of those things between Lead 52 and the Essentials of Project Management. Those would be two pretty practical things. It's not theory. It's all, how do you help as soon as you get done with it, and start implementing it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And in addition to that, those two, what would be the best way the audience can reach you?
Yeah, I've maxed out my connections on LinkedIn. So I normally would have said connect on LinkedIn. Although if you go to LinkedIn on my profile and hit follow and ring the bell, our posts, we can interact there doing it that way. But beyond that, on my LinkedIn profile, if you say contact information, it's there. And so you can do that. Or on our podcast website, there's a contact form. So it's the People and Projects podcast. So there's a contact us. So that's a great way to do it as well. So either way, I talk with listeners almost every day. So I'd love to be able to interact with people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That will be the screenshot of the website will be up on the screen very shortly, or just before this conversation. Right. So for the viewers to be able to see and get to. Now, for the audience, if you've enjoyed this episode, please share what resonated with you the most. We do value your feedback because your success as a project manager matters to not just us who are working to ensure that effective, great project management continues to filter into the world, but that you, of course, you get to be part of that. Now, our mission is to help you excel, so don't miss out on the next resource, the next videos on your screen. Above all, never forget, every man is the architect of his own fortunes. Thank you.